how does a single day in a peaceful, high-trust Scandinavian country fundamentally alter the global landscape of extremism?
Right. That is the big question.
Yeah, and today we are answering that question for you. We are examining an attack that exposed a terrifying loophole in global security, birthed a dark blueprint for the digital far right, and left a country struggling to figure out how to build a monument to healing, without torturing the very people who survived the trauma. Welcome to the deep dive. We've curated and custom-tailored this exploration just for you.
It is an incredibly heavy topic, obviously, but an absolutely vital one. When we look back at the July 22, 2011 Norway attacks, we aren't just looking at history.
No, not at all.
We are looking at the exact moment the blueprint for modern digital terrorism was drafted.
And to really understand that blueprint, we need to go far beyond the headlines you might remember from back then. Our mission today is to completely unpack the tactical execution of this tragedy.
Unpack all of it, yeah.
We're going to dissect the perpetrator's infamous massive manifesto and trace exactly how that specific document mutated into the gamified internet terror culture we see today.
Which is a wild shift.
It really is. And finally, we're going to look very closely at the poignant long-term human aftermath for the survivors, because the story doesn't end when the police arrive.
It never does. And to do this, we are synthesizing 3 incredibly robust pieces of source material. First, we have a comprehensive, minute-by-minute historical timeline of the attacks themselves.
Which is chilling to read, honestly.
It is. Second, we are pulling from a fascinating expert analysis by GNet, that's the Global Network on Extremism and Technology, which tracks the bizarre evolution of far-right manifestos over the last decade.
Right.
And third, we're looking at a massive, incredibly detailed, longitudinal clinical study by the Norwegian Center for Violence and Traumatic Stress Studies, or NKVTS for short.
Okay, NKVTS, got it.
Right. And they actually track the health of those survivors over the course of nearly a decade.
Now, before we dive into the mechanics of this, we need to state something very clearly. It's a mandatory disclaimer for a reason.
Absolutely essential.
The sources we are dissecting today contain highly politically charged content. We are going to be discussing far-right, anti-Islamic, and white supremacist ideologies.
Right, the core of the attacker's worldview.
Exactly. So we want to make it absolutely clear to you, the listener, that we take absolutely no sides, and we are in no way endorsing any of these viewpoints.
None whatsoever.
Our goal here is strictly and impartially reporting on the factual content provided in the source material. We have to analyze the ideological mechanics of this event so you can understand how it functioned.
Because analyzing a threat does not mean we are amplifying its message.
Exactly. That is a crucial distinction.
You cannot dismantle a piece of machinery without first turning the lights on and looking at how the gears fit together. And the gears of this specific tragedy were turning long before the summer of 2011.
Right. And that is where we have to start, because the sheer devastating scale of what one lone actor achieved requires us to look at the preparation phase.
It took years.
Right. This wasn't some spontaneous crime of passion or a sudden snap. Anders Behring Breivik was methodically preparing for these attacks at least as early as 2009.
Which means 2 full years of living a double life.
And what is so chilling is how entirely he concealed his violent intentions in plain sight. He basically weaponized boredom and bureaucracy.
He absolutely did. The level of operational security he maintained is, it's one of the most studied aspects of this case. In 2009, he legally established a sole proprietorship.
Okay.
He called it Breivik Geofarm. And on paper, the company was established under the completely fictitious purpose of cultivating vegetables, melons, roots, and tubers.
Melons and tubers.
Yeah. He registered the place of business in Åmot municipality, which is a rural area in Hedmark County.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if I want to buy a massive amount of restricted chemicals to build a bomb, I can't just walk into a local hardware store and load up a shopping cart.
No, of course not. They'd flag you instantly.
Right. But by setting up this agricultural front, he basically gave himself a VIP pass to bypass the very security measures designed to stop terrorism. So how did a fake melon farm allow him to acquire bomb-making materials?
Well, it comes down to the logistics of commercial agriculture. Farming requires massive amounts of fertilizer,
Sure.
specifically ammonium nitrate, which is highly explosive under the right conditions. By setting up a legally registered agricultural business, he entered a completely different regulatory tier.
So the rules just didn't apply to him the same way.
Exactly. In May 2011, through Geofarm, he legally purchased 6 tons of fertilizer.
6 tons?
Yeah, it included 3 tons of pure ammonium nitrate and 3 tons of calcium ammonium nitrate. He just, had it delivered and stored in a barn on a farm he had rented.
And no one batted an eye, like no flags went off anywhere?
No one. Because there was no specific legislation in Norway at the time keeping agricultural businesses from buying unlimited amounts of fertilizer.
Wow.
I mean, his purchase was large, sure, but for a commercial farm, it wasn't an anomaly. It triggered 0 alarms in the national security apparatus.
That is deeply unsettling. I read that the director of the Norwegian Police Security Service later went on record stating that not even the Stasi could have prevented this attack based purely on that fertilizer purchase.
Right. The loophole was perfectly exploited.
But explosives are only half of the tactical equation here. He also needed a serious arsenal of firearms. And what really stands out in the timeline is that his initial plan to get those guns was a spectacular failure.
Oh, it's a fascinating detail. It totally disrupts the myth of him being this flawless criminal mastermind.
Yeah.
In late August 2010, Breivik drove to Prague and spent 6 days there.
Prague. Why Prague?
Well, he had spent hours researching the city on the internet, and he'd convinced himself, largely based on movies and internet forums, that Prague was the most important transit point for illicit drugs and weapons in Europe.
So he thought it was some sort of comic book villain hive.
Essentially, yeah. He fully believed he could just walk into the criminal underworld and buy heavy artillery.
He even modified his car for this, didn't he?
Yes, he completely hollowed out the rear seats of his Hyundai Atos because he wanted enough space to smuggle an AK-47, a Glock pistol, and he even hoped to buy hand grenades straight back to Norway.
Hand grenades in a Hyundai Atos?
Yeah. He even went so far as to print out a highly detailed fake prospectus for a mineral extraction business, just in case he was stopped by Border Patrol and needed an alibi for why he was traveling.
But the reality of Prague was completely different from his internet fantasies.
Entirely different. Prague actually boasts one of the lowest crime rates among European capitals.
So he's just wandering around looking for crime that isn't there.
Pretty much. He wandered around the city, trying to look for shady characters, expecting to easily tap into this brutal, chaotic black market. Instead, he just felt completely safe.
That is almost darkly comical.
He later wrote in his notes that Prague was nothing like what he had seen in the media, and he categorized the entire trip as the first major setback in his operation.
So the criminal underworld rejects him by simply not existing in the way he thought it did, which forces a massive pivot.
Right.
He realizes the black market is a dead end, so he decides to just use the legal system in his own country. And this is where the timeline gets frustrating.
Very frustrating.
Because he had a completely clean criminal record. He had a valid hunting license. He had already owned a shotgun and a bolt-action rifle for 7 years without incident.
He looked perfect on paper.
So he walks into the legal system and applies for a permit for a .223 caliber Ruger Mini 14 semi-automatic carbine.
And his stated reason on the application. He claimed it was for hunting deer.
And the authorities just stamped it approved.
It was approved without friction. He bought the rifle legally for about 1,400 euros. Now, acquiring a handgun in Norway was slightly more difficult.
Right, because you can't really claim you're hunting deer with a handgun.
Exactly. The legal threshold was higher. He had to demonstrate regular active attendance at an official sports shooting club. So he put in the administrative work.
Just treating it like a bureaucratic chore.
From November 2010 to January 2011, he attended 15 mandatory training sessions at the Oslo Pistol Club. He logged the hours. By mid-January, his application for a 9mm Glock 34 was approved.
It is a chilling reminder of how administrative patience can be weaponized. He just politely waited in line and checked the boxes.
And he was also isolating himself during this period to focus entirely on the attack.
Yeah, the video game excuse. Right?
Yeah. He used video games as a cover story. He told his friends and family he was just playing World of Warcraft all day to explain why he wasn't socializing.
But in his own notes, he claimed he was actually using games like Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 2 as a tactical training simulator.
Right. That isolation allowed him to finalize the logistics without any social interruption. Which brings us to the morning of Friday, July 22, 2011.
Let's walk through the timeline of that day, because the precision is staggering and the subsequent failures of the response are equally hard to comprehend.
It begins in the early afternoon. Breivik has successfully constructed a 950-kilogram ANFO bomb.
Which is massive.
It's a massive mixture of ammonium nitrate fertilizer and fuel oil. To give you a sense of scale, this is essentially the exact same chemical composition and relative size of the bomb used by Timothy McVeigh in the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing.
Wow.
He places this massive device inside a rented, unassuming white Volkswagen Crafter van.
Okay, so at 1513, the timeline shows surveillance cameras catching this white van entering the government quarter in central Oslo. He brazenly ignores a no-entry sign.
He just drives right past it.
Yeah. And at exactly 15.1 scene, he parks the van directly in front of the main entrance of the H block.
The H block.
Right. This is the building that housed the office of the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Justice, the absolute center of Norwegian political power.
So he opens the door and steps out.
Yeah.
He's dressed in a meticulously homemade police uniform, complete with a helmet, a face shield, and a visible pistol.
Looking completely official.
Completely. He stands outside the van for 7 seconds, just looking around, and then quickly walks away toward a secondary getaway car, a silver Fiat Doblo that he had strategically parked nearby earlier.
And then at 15.25 and 22 seconds, the bomb detonates.
The sheer physics of the blast were devastating. It immediately started massive fires in the H block and the surrounding government buildings.
The footage from that day is apocalyptic.
It blew out windows across the entire square, sending glass raining down onto the streets. The shockwave was so powerful it was heard at least 9 kilometers away.
9 kilometers.
The immediate explosion killed 8 people and injured at least 210 others, sending this massive, thick cloud of white smoke drifting over the city center.
But the Prime Minister, Jens Stoltenberg, was not in the building. Wait, if his entire goal was to decapitate the government leadership, why detonate the bomb on a Friday afternoon during July?
It's a fair question.
Right, because July is the typical Norwegian summer holiday month. The building was largely empty. Was that a massive miscalculation on his part?
It was a combination of logistical delays and the reality of Norwegian work culture. He had initially planned to detonate it earlier in the day, but his own meticulous preparations and traffic slowed him down.
So he was just running late.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And furthermore, because it was a Friday in July, many government workers had already left for the weekend or were working shortened summer hours. Had he detonated that bomb at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, the death toll in that government quarter would have been catastrophic.
The building would have been full.
Completely full.
So the chaos is absolute. The streets are filled with debris, sirens are blaring, and the police and emergency services are frantically scrambling to clear the area because they are terrified of secondary devices.
Right. Standard protocol when a bomb goes off.
But while the entire national security apparatus is focused on this smoking crater in Oslo, Breivik is already driving away in the Fiat. And this is where the timeline gets incredibly frustrating for anyone looking at the police response.
It is a timeline of missed opportunities. A civilian witness actually called the police just 9 minutes after the blast.
9 minutes.
This witness reported seeing a suspicious man in police tactical gear carrying a pistol and getting into a silver Fiat Doblo. The witness was alert enough to give the police the exact license plate number.
Imagine calling the police with the license plate of a terrorist driving away from a bombing. You'd think that triggers a national manhunt instantly.
You would hope so.
But what actually happened?
That critical piece of intelligence was written down on a yellow sticky note at the police operations center.
A sticky note?
Yes. And because the center was completely overwhelmed with the chaos of the bombing, that sticky note sat on a desk for 20 minutes before anyone even called the witness back to verify it.
20 minutes sitting on a desk.
And it gets worse. Furthermore, that license plate number was not transmitted out on the National Police radio network for another 2 hours.
2 hours? That delay is staggering. A terrorist is driving through the country, and the police on the ground have no idea what car to look for.
None.
And that delay is exactly what allows the second phase of this nightmare to unfold. Because less than 2 hours after the Oslo bombing, at roughly 16.55, Breivik arrives at the Utøya ferry landing, which is about 40 kilometers northwest of Oslo.
Utøya is a small, wooded island situated in a lake. It is the site of the annual summer camp for the Workers' Youth League, which is the youth wing of the ruling Labour Party.
Right.
On that specific Friday, there are roughly 600 teenagers on the island, and they are already terrified, having heard the news about the bombing in Oslo, trying to call their parents.
Just a horrific atmosphere of panic already. And then Breivik, still dressed in his fake police uniform, presents a forged identification card under the name Martin Nilsson.
He tells the ferry operators that he has been sent to the island to conduct a routine security check following the bombing in the capital.
And he projects absolute authority, right?
Total confidence.
Yes.
He boards the ferry, the MS Thorbjørn, and arrives on the island. But someone realizes something is wrong almost immediately.
Yes. The camp leader, Monica Besai, she becomes suspicious of his demeanor and his gear. She immediately contacts the island security officer, an off-duty policeman named Trond Bertsen.
Right.
They approach Breivik to question him.
And Breivik doesn't hesitate. He shoots and kills them both right there.
God.
That is how the massacre begins. He then signals for the young, panicked campers to gather around him, pretending he is going to protect them, before pulling his weapons from his bag and opening fire indiscriminately into the crowd.
It's just unthinkable. And for the next 72 minutes, an agonizing hour and 12 minutes, he roams this small island.
The clinical details reported by the survivors are harrowing.
Yeah.
He specifically used hollow point and frangible bullets in his weapons.
Which are designed to do maximum damage.
Exactly. These aren't standard rounds. They're designed to fragment upon impact, intentionally maximizing tissue damage and organ trauma. He shouted political slogans yelling, "You will die today, Marxists," as he hunted teenagers through the woods.
It's just absolute cruelty.
Survivors reported that some kids pretended to be dead, lying perfectly still in the grass, but he methodically walked back through the areas and shot bodies again to ensure there were no survivors.
He was checking bodies.
Yes, and when teenagers desperately tried to swim across the freezing lake to the mainland, he stood on the shoreline and used his rifle to shoot at them in the water.
It is an absolute nightmare scenario. But amidst this unimaginable horror, there was also incredible spontaneous bravery.
There was.
You have 47 campers who managed to seek refuge in a building called the Schoolhouse, alongside personnel from Norwegian People's Aid.
And he tried to get in.
He did. Breivik fired bullets through the heavy wooden door, but he couldn't force his way in, and they held their ground and survived.
And we have to mention the two Chechen teenagers, Movsar Jamayev and Rustam Daudov.
Yep.
These were kids who had actually survived brutal wars in Chechnya during their childhood. When the shooting started, their survival instincts kicked in.
He didn't freeze.
No, they actually picked up heavy rocks and pelted the heavily armed gunman to try and disorient him and stop his advance.
Wow, throwing rocks at a guy with a rifle.
Then they found a concealed cave on the island, hid 23 younger children inside it, and spent the attack dragging, drowning exhausted youths from the freezing lake.
And the civilian response from the mainland was equally heroic. You have local residents, people washing their cars or grilling dinner, and tourists on vacation who hear the gunfire echoing across the water.
Because sound travels so clearly over water.
Exactly. And they didn't run away. They jumped into their small fiberglass motorboats and inflatable dinghies, and they drove directly into the line of fire to pull bleeding, shivering teenagers from the water.
A German tourist named Marcel Gleff is credited with saving up to 30 lives by making multiple trips in his boat while under fire. A married couple on vacation, Hedge Dalen and Toril Hansen, steered their boat toward the bullets and saved another 40 youths. A local resident, Casper Ilog, made 3 separate trips into the danger zone.
These civilians essentially became the frontline rescue operation.
Because the police were nowhere to be found.
Okay, let's unpack this because this is the part of the timeline that breaks my brain. You have regular citizens in fishing boats charging toward a mass shooter, but the heavily armed, highly trained National Police Tactical Unit, the Delta Force, takes over an hour to reach the island.
It's a catastrophic delay.
This brings to mind the Swiss cheese model of disaster that risk analysts talk about. For those unfamiliar, it's the idea that in any complex system, you have multiple layers of defense, like slices of Swiss cheese.
Right, and each slice has holes in it.
Exactly, representing flaws or weaknesses. Usually, a flaw in one layer is caught by the next layer. But a catastrophe happens when all the holes line up perfectly, allowing the threat to pass straight through. So was this an unforeseeable black swan event that no police force in the world could have handled? Or was this a preventable systemic failure where all the holes just perfectly aligned?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the historical consensus leans heavily toward preventable systemic failure.
Really?
Following the attacks, the Norwegian parliament ordered an independent commission, resulting in the 2012 Gear report. The findings were absolutely damning.
What did it find?
The report explicitly concluded that the police could have prevented the Oslo bombing if basic existing security measures regarding road access to the government quarter had actually been implemented. And crucially, it found that they could have caught the shooter much sooner at Utøya.
So how did the holes in the cheese line up for the tactical team?
The logistical failures cascaded. First, the police did not have a rapid transport helicopter available to fly the Delta team directly to the island.
Why not?
The only helicopter the police force operated was designed solely for observation and surveillance. not troop transport. And incredibly, the crew for that surveillance helicopter was on summer vacation.
You're kidding.
No. So the elite tactical team had no choice but to load into cars and drive the 40 kilometers from Oslo in heavy traffic.
And when they finally get to the edge of the lake, they can see the islanders, they can hear the gunfire, but they can't find a suitable boat to cross the water.
Exactly. Local patrol police had actually arrived at the mainland shore less than 30 minutes after the shooting started.
Wait, really? Local cops were there that early?
Yes, but because they didn't have a boat, and under the protocols at the time, they were ordered to simply observe and report until the tactical unit arrived.
So they just watch.
When the Delta Tactical Unit finally arrived by car, they brought a rigid-hulled inflatable boat. But in their rush, they severely overloaded it with heavily armed operators and their gear.
They put too many guys in it.
Too many guys. The boat took on water, the propeller failed, and the engine literally died in the middle of the lake.
So you have the country's most elite counterterrorism unit stranded in a broken rubber boat in the middle of a lake while a massacre is happening hundreds of yards away.
They literally had to wave down the civilian boats, the same civilians who were actively rescuing the kids, and hijack a ride on those small recreational boats the rest of the way to the island.
Just an absolute logistical nightmare. So they finally make landfall at 18.25. They yell at him to surrender. And after 72 minutes of relentless violence, he simply drops his weapons and gives up.
Just like that.
It's over. But the toll is unimaginable. 69 people are dead on the island. The average age of the victims was 19.6 years old.
Kids, basically.
When you combine that with the 8 people killed in the Oslo bombing, that is 77 lives extinguished by one man in the span of a few hours.
It remains the deadliest attack in Norway since the end of World War II. It was a trauma that fundamentally shook the foundation of the nation.
It's hard to wrap your head around the sheer physical devastation, but the methodical, calculated nature of the physical attack was perfectly mirrored in the digital world.
Yes, it was.
Because just hours prior to driving that white van into Oslo, he uploaded a massive document to the internet. And this is the pivot point of our deep dive.
Right.
Why go through the monumental, exhausting effort of writing a book before committing a massacre? What is the function of the text?
To understand that, we have to transition from what happened on the ground to why it happened in his mind.
Okay.
We need to analyze the ideology and the mental state of the perpetrator, because we have to recognize that his ultimate goal was never just the violence itself.
The violence was just a tool.
The violence was a horrific marketing tool for his ideas. He believed he was sparking a revolution, and the document was the spark.
The document he uploaded is titled 2083, A European Declaration of Independence. He wrote it under the anglicized pseudonym Andrew Berwick.
And the sheer size of it is baffling.
It is 1,518 pages long. To put that in perspective, that is significantly longer than War and Peace. Who writes 1,500 pages before an attack?
He didn't view it as just a manifesto. He described it as a comprehensive compendium. He spent years compiling it, dividing it into 3 distinct books.
Okay, let's break this down.
The first book is essentially a dense, pseudo-intellectual, quasi-historical overview. He attempts to rewrite centuries of history to warn against what he views as Islamic imperialism.
And the second book?
Book 2 is titled Europe Burning, and this outlines his core ideological paranoia, the perceived threat of cultural Marxism, and the Islamization of Europe.
Let's pause there, because terms like cultural Marxism get thrown around a lot in modern political discourse. But what did it specifically mean in the context of this 1,500-page document?
In his framework, cultural Marxism is a conspiratorial belief that a small group of leftist intellectuals and politicians deliberately engineered the destruction of traditional Western culture through policies like feminism, multiculturalism, and liberal immigration laws.
So he saw it as an inside job.
Completely. He blamed these politicians for intentionally eroding the fabric of traditional European society to make it vulnerable to outside influence.
And then there's book 3, which he titled A Declaration of Preemptive War. And this is where the text shifts dramatically from a dry political rant to a chilling step-by-step operational manual for terrorism.
It's practically a textbook.
It includes a bizarre self-interview where he asks and answers his own questions, but it also contains highly specific, extensive instructions on how to acquire restricted chemicals, how to manufacture explosives in a kitchen, how to train with firearms, and a detailed daily diary documenting his preparations leading right up to July 22.
And here's where the tactical analysis from the GNet report becomes crucial. Jacob Ware, an extremism researcher, points out that this attack was a rare and defining example of targeting what counterterrorism experts call the near enemy.
Here's where it gets really interesting. What is the difference between a near enemy and a far enemy in this context?
In the vocabulary of extremism, the far enemy usually refers to the ultimate ideological opponent, the group the extremist ultimately wants to remove or destroy.
Okay.
In right-wing extremism, this is typically minority communities, immigrants, or foreign governments. Historically, most far-right attacks target the far enemy directly. Think of an attacker targeting a mosque, a synagogue, or a supermarket in a minority neighborhood.
Right. But Breivik didn't do that. He didn't attack an immigrant neighborhood in Oslo.
He didn't. He attacked the near enemy, his own government, and the youth wing of the ruling political party.
So he viewed them as traitors.
He viewed the Labour Party not as the ultimate foreign threat, but as the traitors inside the gates who were facilitating the multiculturalism he despised. By deliberately targeting the youth camp at Utøya, he was executing a deeply strategic, albeit horrific, plan.
What was the goal there?
He was explicitly trying to decimate the next generation of political leadership before they could take power and continue the policies he hated.
So he sees himself as a strategic military commander. But as dense and supposedly philosophical as this 1,500-page manifesto is, the research shows it's not even original.
Not at all.
Much of it is just violently plagiarized. He literally copy-pasted vast sections from counter-jihad bloggers, specifically a pseudonymous writer known as Fjordman.
He relied heavily on other writers.
He cited American anti-Islam writers like Robert Spencer dozens of times, but the craziest part to me is how he stole from the Unabomber.
Oh, yes. He took the manifesto written by Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and utilized a literal word processor find and replace function.
Wait, like Microsoft Word find and replace?
Exactly like that. He took Kaczynski's intricate rants against leftists and just swapped the word with cultural Marxists. He replaced Kaczynski's mentions of black people with Muslims.
That's absurd.
He essentially hollowed out an older terrorist manifesto and poured his own preferred buzzwords into the shell.
It's a Frankenstein's monster of extremism. He stitched together dead ideas from other people to create his own cohesive threat. And this profound lack of originality carried over directly into his trial, which became this massive, highly publicized battleground over his sanity.
The sanity debate was the defining drama of the legal proceedings. After his arrest, the court appointed a team of forensic psychiatrists to evaluate him.
And what did they say?
Their initial report diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. They concluded that he was suffering from profound psychosis during the attacks, driven by grandiose delusions, and therefore, under Norwegian law, he was criminally insane and not legally culpable in a traditional sense.
But Breivik was absolutely furious about that diagnosis. Why would a man facing the rest of his life in prison fight a diagnosis that might send him to a hospital instead?
Because of his ego and his ideological mission. He was deeply insulted by the schizophrenia diagnosis because he recognized that it completely undermined his political message.
Oh, I see.
If he was officially labeled a madman, then his 1,500-page compendium was just the meaningless raving of a lunatic. It wouldn't be the grand political awakening he intended.
It strips away all his power.
Exactly. He needed society to view his actions as a rational, calculated military strike. He actively and aggressively fought the medical diagnosis.
He practically begged the court to declare him a sane terrorist rather than an insane patient.
Yes, and the public outcry and his own resistance led the court to order a second psychiatric evaluation with a new team. And this second evaluation concluded that while he suffered from narcissistic personality disorders, he was not psychotic. He was legally sane.
So he gets what he wants. He ends up admitting to carrying out the attacks, but officially pleads not guilty.
A very strange legal maneuver.
He claims a bizarre defense of necessity, arguing that his actions were atrocious but absolutely necessary to save Europe from demographic collapse. The court ultimately agrees he was sane, rejects his defense, and sentences him to 21 years of preventive detention.
Which is the maximum sentence in Norway, though the law allows it to be extended indefinitely.
Right, essentially keeping him in prison for life as long as he remains a threat. But I have to push back on the legacy of his writing here.
Okay.
He views himself as this grand Knights Templar crusader, a brilliant philosopher warrior saving Western civilization. Yet, as we discussed, his text is a plagiarized Frankenstein's monster.
Very true.
It is largely unoriginal, heavily stolen, and incredibly dry and boring to read. If it's that dense and unoriginal, why did it become such an infamous, successful blueprint for global terror?
This raises an important question about how extremism actually spreads in the digital age. The text power did not come from its originality, its intellectual rigor, or its prose.
Where did it come from?
Its power came entirely from its delivery system. By inextricably linking a massive ideological document to an act of unspeakable, shocking mass violence, he essentially forced the world to acknowledge it.
He tied the book to a bomb.
Yes. He turned the global news media into an unwilling distribution network for his ideas. That set a terrifying new precedent for right-wing terrorism. He definitively proved to the extremist underground that violence is the ultimate amplifier for fringe ideologies.
So he sought to be a grand ideological philosopher. He wanted people analyzing his historical theories about 2083 in university seminars, but the online communities that actually followed him took away a very different, much darker lesson.
A purely tactical lesson.
Which brings us to the next phase, our deep dive, the dark legacy and the evolution of the digital far right.
We have to ask, did his blueprint work?
Did it?
Tragically, the data from GNet shows that yes, it did. The act of publishing a manifesto right before executing a mass shooting has become a ritualized practice. It is like a baton passed in a horrific relay race of extremists.
It's almost an expectation now.
The most prominent and devastating example of this contagion effect is Brenton Tarrant, the perpetrator of the 2019 Christchurch mosque shootings in New Zealand, who murdered 51 people.
And Tarrant specifically cited Breivik in his own manifesto, didn't he? He claimed he had brief contact with him and was directly inspired by his actions.
He did. And in turn, Tarrant became the catalyst for a whole new wave of copycat attacks. Tarrant's use of a live stream and a viral manifesto directly inspired the shooters in Buffalo, New York, Poway, California, El Paso, Texas, and Halle, Germany.
It just keeps rippling outward.
And even before Tarrant, the blueprint was working. There was Munich, a Polish chemistry lecturer who was arrested in 2012 for plotting to detonate a massive 4-ton car bomb outside the Polish parliament.
And he read the 1,500 pages.
When authorities interrogated him, he explicitly cited Breivik's bomb-making instructions from Book 3 as his direct inspiration.
But the way these manifestos are shared, the actual mechanics of the digital distribution has evolved drastically since 2011. Let's contract the technology because it highlights how much faster the threat moves now.
The speed is the real issue.
Think about how you shared files in 2011 versus today. To distribute his 1,500 pages, Breivik used what we would now consider archaic, almost comical methods. He spent months engaging in what security experts call email farming.
It was incredibly tedious. He created fake Facebook profiles to slowly and carefully add thousands of friends who expressed far-right views. He manually harvested over 8,000 specific email addresses into a database.
That sounds exhausting.
His master plan was to press send on a massive email blast containing his manifesto just hours before the bombing.
And on the day of the attack, this grand multi-year distribution plan was thwarted by a completely basic IT safeguard. He discovered, to his horror, that his email provider's standard spam filter restricted him from sending out more than 1,000 emails per day.
A basic spam filter. This technical hiccup is a crucial detail. It delayed his entire operational timeline significantly on July 22.
So he was stuck at his computer fighting with his email provider.
Exactly. And analysts heavily speculate that this specific delay actually saved lives in the Oslo government quarter.
Because it pushed the detonation later in the day.
Right, because by the time the bomb finally detonated, many more workers had already left for the weekend. Furthermore, his main political target, Gro Harlem Brundtland, a former prime minister who gave a speech at Utøya that day, had already finished her presentation and left the island before he managed to arrive.
A mundane corporate spam filter saved lives. That is a wild detail, but compare that bottleneck to the post-2019 attackers. Think about how fast a meme travels across your own group chats today.
Within seconds.
Now imagine that same frictionless distribution, but weaponized to spread a terrorist's lab notes. That is what law enforcement is suddenly up against. Modern attackers don't need to manually email 8,000 people.
Nope, they don't use email at all.
They just export a PDF and effortlessly drop it onto anonymous internet platforms like 8chan, 4chan, or secure messaging apps like Telegram.
And the moment that file drops, the digital communities on those platforms instantly download it, archive it, and mirror the documents globally across thousands of servers within seconds.
It's unstoppable.
It is instantaneous, decentralized global distribution. It cannot be stopped by a single spam filter or by taking down one website.
Alongside this rapid shift in distribution technology, the GNet researchers highlight a massive shift in the culture and tone of these documents. Breivik wrote 1,518 pages of dense, pseudo-intellectual historical theory. He was trying to sound like a Victorian statesman.
He wanted to be a historic figure.
But the post-Christchurch manifestos shrank dramatically. They are no longer books. They are highly digestible 7 to 74-page documents.
And the tone is so completely different, and in many ways much more terrifying because of its accessibility. These later shooters weren't trying to sound like serious political philosophers.
What were they sounding like?
They used playful fonts like Comic Sans. They heavily embedded anime references. They actively gamified the violence, making inside jokes about the video game Minecraft to describe their real-world attacks.
That is just sick.
They used heavy layers of irony and trolling, specifically tailored to appeal to internet chan culture, which refers to the anonymous image boards where users compete for shock value and inside jokes. Tarrant literally asked his followers in his document to make memes and shitpost to spread his message.
Wait, I have to stop and ask about this. If the modern shooters are using Comic Sans and making Minecraft jokes, I have to push back on this idea of Breivik as this revered ideological grandfather for the modern movement.
Okay, go ahead.
Are you telling me these modern far-right digital communities don't actually care about his 1,500 pages of historical theory? They just ignore the core of his life's work.
What's fascinating here is that the GNet report confirms exactly that. It is the ultimate irony of Breivik's legacy.
Real.
Modern digital extremist subcultures actually find Breivik too straight-edge, too long-winded, and frankly too boring. When intelligence researchers scan through far-right networks like Telegram, which in these circles is often grimly referred to as Terrorgram, they find that Breivik's first two books dealing with history and ideology are virtually never cited. No one is reading his historical analysis.
So what part of his work do they actually care about?
They only engage with Book 3, his practical step-by-step lab notes on making explosives and his tactical evaluations of specific firearms and armor.
Just the manual.
The internet has stripped away his dense political theory and turned his identity into a flattened, aesthetic meme. They refer to him, ironically, as Saint Anders.
Hey, Anders.
They glorify the raw violence, they celebrate the tactical details of how he pulled it off, and they occasionally mock his few awkward attempts at humor in his lab notes. But they completely discard the philosophical ideology he spent years writing. They stripped his legacy for parts.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Why should you care about the reading habits and font choices of fringe internet communities?
It's vital context.
You have to understand the shift because it fundamentally changes the nature of the threat. Modern extremism isn't being driven by deep, persuasive political theory that you can logically dismantle or argue against in a town hall debate.
You can't debate a meme.
Exactly. It is driven by highly digestible, gamified internet meme culture. It's designed to be viral, ironic, and easily consumable by alienated youth who spend all day online. It's radicalization through shitposting.
It's a vital distinction for counterterrorism. When the medium changes from a dense 1,500-page book to a funny, ironic internet meme, the barrier to radicalization drops significantly.
They just passively absorb it.
You don't have to read a manifesto, you just have to laugh at a meme.
Yeah.
The violence itself becomes a punchline, and that is incredibly difficult to police.
But while the digital world was busy abstracting this tragedy, turning it into memes, PDFs, and tactical blueprints, back in the physical world, a grieving nation and deeply traumatized survivors had to figure out how to wake up the next day and keep living.
The real world doesn't just reboot.
The story didn't end when the police finally arrested him. Which brings us to the human aftermath.
Grounding this abstract discussion of global terror and internet culture back into the visceral human reality of the survivors is essential. We cannot talk about the legacy of July 22 without talking about the people who lived through it.
Right.
To understand the profound long-term impact of this kind of event, we turn to the massive longitudinal study conducted by NKVTS.
When we say longitudinal study, what does that actually look like in practice over nearly a decade?
It means they didn't just check in on the survivors once and write a report. They tracked 398 Utøya survivors and their parents across 4 distinct waves of intensive data collection spanning 8.5 years after the attack.
That is a massive commitment.
They continually assess their psychological and physical state to map the long-term trajectory of trauma.
And participation rate was incredibly high for a study like this, around 79%, which gives the medical community a really clear, undeniable picture of the aftermath. And the findings completely shatter the idea that psychological trauma is just in your head.
Oh, absolutely. The trauma was deeply physical.
The connection between the mind and the body is heavily documented in this data.
The study showed a direct, compounding correlation between the severe physical injuries sustained during the shooting, the chronic physical pain that followed, and the severity of post-traumatic stress disorder.
They fed into each other.
Survivors reported incredibly high rates of severe chronic insomnia, struggling to sleep even 8 years later.
And think about what that means for a teenager. It wasn't just about managing nightmares in a vacuum. It was about trying to re-enter normal life.
Which was almost impossible for some.
Imagine surviving a 72-minute massacre, watching your friends die, and then 3 months later, society expects you to go back to high school, sit in a fluorescent-lit classroom, and concentrate on algebra.
It's absurd to expect them to just adapt. The NKVTS study highlighted profound systemic struggles with school performance, massive dropout rates among survivors, and severe difficulties with social integration.
But beyond the academic and physical struggles, there was a shattered sense of institutional trust.
This is a huge factor.
These teenagers had been victims of an ultimate betrayal of safety. They were attacked by a man wearing the uniform of the state, a police uniform, while the actual police, the people whose entire job was to protect them, took over an hour to arrive due to systemic failures.
How do you trust the system, the government, or the police ever again after that?
Rebuilding that baseline trust takes years, if it happens at all. And this struggle for healing wasn't just individual, it played out violently on a national and community level, leading to incredible complexities regarding memory and how we memorialize tragedy.
This brings us to one of the most sociologically complex parts of the aftermath. The nation of Norway felt an intense need to memorialize the event, to create a physical space to process the grief.
Let's talk about the Surbruten Memorial, which was proposed by the government to be a grand national monument called the Memory Wound.
The architectural design was visually striking.
The plan was to take a literal 1.2 decare slice and cut it completely out of the peninsula facing Utøya Island. It would create a physical gap in the land, representing the permanent wound conflicted on the nation.
Artistically and conceptually, it was incredibly powerful. The nation, the politicians in Oslo, and many families of the victims wanted a monumental space to grieve.
But the local neighbors, the people who actually lived on the mainland facing the island, vehemently opposed it.
And we have to remember who these specific neighbors were. These weren't just random citizens complaining about construction noise.
Right.
Many of these neighbors were the very civilians who had jumped into their boats, driven into gunfire, and rescued the teenagers while the police were delayed.
So you have a situation where the heroes of the day actually sued the Norwegian government to stop the construction of this national memorial.
Okay, let's unpack this a little bit. It feels like picking at a scab that hasn't been allowed to heal.
It really does. You have a nation that desperately needs a symbol to process an abstract trauma, and a local community that desperately needs peace to process a lived trauma. Is it even possible for a national monument to effectively honor the dead without actively punishing the local heroes who are forced to live next to it every single day?
The expert psychological testimony in that lawsuit perfectly captures this profound tension. The local rescuers testified in court that a permanent physical scar carved into their landscape combined with a massive influx of what sociologists call dark tourism.
What's dark tourism?
People traveling to sites of tragedy to take selfies with the island in the background. They testified that this would constantly re-traumatize them. They argued it would destroy any chance they had at a normal life.
One of the rescuers gave testimony that just breaks your heart. He said that if they built the monument, he wouldn't be able to look at its artistic columns. He said, "I will only be able to see the faces of the dead."
That is just crushing.
He testified that he was still deeply haunted by the memory of having to leave a critically wounded boy bleeding in the lake because bullets were whizzing past his head. Another local was haunted by the sound of unanswered mobile phones constantly ringing from the bodies left in the tall grass for days after the attack.
It highlights a profound disconnect in human psychology. A nation processes grief abstractly.
Yeah.
The public needs a symbol, a designated, highly visible place to lay flowers and remember an event that happened out there. But individuals process grief viscerally.
They can't escape it.
For the locals, the trauma wasn't a historical event. It was a sensory nightmare they lived through in their own front yards.
Right.
Forcing them to live inside a massive national monument was seen by some trauma psychologists as an extreme lack of empathy for the saviors.
Ultimately, the government canceled the Memory Wound Project at that specific site after years of exhausting legal battles. They recognized the tragic irony that you simply cannot build a monument to national healing that actively causes profound harm to the people who did the healing.
It's an impossible situation.
Healing from an event of this magnitude is a process that may never truly end. Not for the survivors battling chronic pain and insomnia, not for the rescuers haunted by the ringing phones, and not for a society trying to balance freedom with the intense reality of modern security.
Indeed, it forces us to constantly reevaluate our vulnerabilities, both physical and digital.
To summarize our deep dive today, the July 22 attacks serve as a tragic, undeniable masterclass in the cascading failures of physical security.
It showed us how fragile the system is.
It showed us how a single bureaucratic loophole regarding agricultural fertilizer and a broken boat engine can perfectly align to allow unthinkable tragedy. It showed us the unpredictable ways extremist ideology mutates on the internet, evolving from a dense, plagiarized 1,500-page manifesto into gamified, viral memes that radicalize entirely new generations.
And most importantly, it showed us the grueling long-term reality of psychological trauma and the impossible complexities of national healing.
As we wrap up, what's our final takeaway here?
As we conclude this analysis, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building directly on the source material regarding the rapid digital evolution of these threats. The GNet reports mention that tech platforms today use what are called hashing databases to combat the spread of manifestos.
Okay, hashing databases.
For context, think of a hash as assigning a unique, cryptographic digital fingerprint to a specific PDF file. If someone tries to upload that exact file again on a different platform, the system immediately recognizes the fingerprint and blocks it instantly.
So it's a digital arms race. Law enforcement finds the PDF, creates a fingerprint, and blocks it from spreading.
Exactly. But as we enter an era of advanced artificial intelligence and decentralized technology, we have to ask a deeply unsettling question. What happens when a manifesto is no longer a static PDF document that can be fingerprinted?
What do you mean?
What happens when the blueprint becomes an interactive AI-driven chatbot? If future extremists deploy large language models designed not just to broadcast a static, boring 1,500-page message, but to actively converse with, emotionally groom, and continuously radicalize vulnerable people in real time, adapting its arguments dynamically to target a user's specific insecurities, how on earth does society or law enforcement prepare for dynamic, conversational radicalization that has no static fingerprint to block?
Wow, that is a terrifying evolution. It means the delivery system of extremism is about to step off the page and become intensely personal.
It's something we need to be prepared for.
Thank you for joining us on this incredibly complex journey today. We hope this deep dive has given you a much clearer understanding of the physical mechanics, the digital legacy, and the profound human cost of extremism. Keep asking the hard questions, keep seeking multiple perspectives, and we will see you next time.